Welcome back to my channel. How are we all doing today? Today we're making one of my favourite Sunday roast side dishes, and a dish that I think is an absolute must at Christmas, which is a cauliflower cheese. And for the Americans out there that maybe aren't as familiar with a cauliflower cheese, essentially it is what it says on the tin. It's a cauliflower cooked in a cheese or a bechamel sauce. So not dissimilar, this process, to making a macaroni cheese, except you're using a nice cauliflower. Today we're also going to be using a broccoli. So it's going to be a broccoli and cauliflower cheese. I'll be honest, I think the first person I saw do this was Jamie Oliver. He's always going to get shout outs on this channel because he was one of the people that inspired my love of cooking, and I've learned a lot from him. So yeah, so we're going to make a cauliflower and broccoli cheese. Ultimately the cauliflower is going to get blanched, and then it's going to go in the dish. We're going to blanch the broccoli, but we're going to take the stem off, and we're going to add the stem to the sauce that we're going to make, which is going to make the sauce nice and green, and add a little bit of flavour from the broccoli. We are going to use 3 different cheeses in the bechamel sauce for this. If you make a cauliflower cheese, normally I would always say you use a cheddar or a smoked cheddar or something quite strong, but we're also going to use a parmesan for the top, so we get a nice parmesan crust on top. Today we're using a regular local cheddar, and we're also using a smoked cheddar. Now the smoked cheddar is just going to add a real deep, rich flavour to the sauce. We're going to also be using a little bit of English mustard. This one's from 𝑭𝒊𝒏𝒅, favourites down the road. Strong English mustard just adds a load of depth to the flavour of the sauce. And what else? And of course, the other little tip that I don't know who I picked this up from, but it works really well, is we're going to add a little bit of smoked streaky bacon before we make the sauce. It's going to add some real nice fat and some real nice flavour to the bechamel. And then to finish it off, to elevate the dish, much like with the carrots where we used almonds to elevate the dish, much like with the roast potatoes you use a nice bit of rosemary, fresh rosemary and garlic at the end, we're going to use some old sourdough that we've had. We're going to blitz it up with some olive oil and some fresh herbs, and we're going to add that with the parmesan and create a parmesan and breadcrumb crust on top of the cauliflower cheese. And this is a great dish, you know, because yes, it's got bechamel sauce. Yes, it's not the healthiest, but you are using 2 quite nutritious vegetables in this. And this, to be honest, can be a dish in the winter, in the colder months, that you could just make as a main instead of a macaroni cheese and with a bit more nutrients. And I would say that a cauliflower cheese without the broccoli, for me, is a must if you're cooking roast beef as part of a Sunday roast, because that cheese sauce just works really nicely with beef. But with a Christmas lunch, I think a cauliflower and broccoli cheese alongside the honey roast carrots and parsnips, alongside some sprouts, your roasties, and potentially some Yorkshire puddings with the nice homemade gravy, that's the perfect lineup for your Christmas lunch. So yeah, as I say, we're going to cut through this cauliflower and break up the florets, similar with the broccoli, and then we're going to blanch them. And while these are blanching, we're going to make a really nice cheese sauce. You might hear in the background we have the water boiling. I filled a pan with just some salted water. We're going to bring that to the boil, and then we're going to lower the temperature a little bit, and we're going to add the cauliflower first, cook it for probably around 2 minutes. Then we're going to add the broccoli florets, cook it for another 2 minutes, and that should be enough to just partially cook all these florets. You don't want to overcook them, but you want them to be cooked enough that they soften up a little bit, and then we're going to take them out, and then we're obviously going to construct it here once we have the lovely bechamel sauce. Another option that you could do, that I have done before, is you could roast the florets, which is also quite nice, and that adds a nice bit of flavour. But there's something about the cauliflower and the broccoli being nice and soft within the cheese sauce that I think works particularly well for a roast side dish. So with regards to cutting the cauliflower, what I tend to do is you take the base off like this with a nice sharp knife, and get rid of some of these leaves. You want to ultimately get to the base here to open it up so that you can then start cutting and breaking the florets off. Some of these nice leaves put to one side, we could maybe use those later. You want to get your cauliflower looking like this, and then what I normally do is start tearing off some of the florets like that. Now, it depends on how you like your cauliflower cheese cooked. I'll probably leave those like that, but if there's any that are too big, you can obviously halve them off. When you get into this bit here, you can start cutting and that will allow you just to pick them out like that. Obviously you want to try and waste as little as possible. What is quite nice is to have a real mixture of different sizes and shapes. And what we're going to try and achieve in this dish is a real mixture of broccoli and cauliflower distributed, both because aesthetically it looks nice, but also it means with every spoonful, you then obviously get a real nice distribution of broccoli to cauliflower. I think when you're thinking about your Christmas lunch, as we were talking about in the last video with the honey roast carrots, it's really nice to try and almost kill two birds with one stone, excuse the very British phrase, and include more than one veg in the dish, because with the honey roast carrots and parsnips, you're kind of keeping lots of people happy with two different vegetables in one dish, less work, which is once again a key pillar of cooking a Christmas lunch, is you want to minimize the work on the day so you've got lots of time to spend with your friends and family. So with regards to this as well, I think people can at Christmas get a bit overwhelmed and a bit carried away with so many side dishes, and therefore, you know, there's a lot of time wasted in the kitchen. But also I think the problem is you can't always give enough time to each individual dish. It's like anything, if you're focused on too many dishes, it can become too overwhelming. So I would suggest focus on 3 or 4 amazing side dishes that you deliver to perfection, and that will go down well. So I've obviously broken all the florets off on the cauliflower. Now, as I say, don't overthink it, but you want ones that are realistically no bigger than this. So when it comes to florets like this, I would just take a knife and cut them in half so that you haven't got huge, huge pieces. It's nice to have a few smaller bits like this as well, just to mix up the different sizes and shapes. So cut any ones that are too big into half. And then what we're going to do is, while the water boils, we're going to prepare the broccoli. Obviously, I'm not a professional chef, so what I've kind of realised at this stage in the video is we've not really talked about how many people this is for. And to be honest, with most of my recipes, it's sort of touch and feel. Base it on what you think will be enough for the group that you're cooking for. This size pan would probably be enough for 6 to 8 people as a side dish. Remember, you're going to have a lot of other dishes at Christmas. But to be honest, there's nothing worse than not having quite enough broccoli and cauliflower cheese. Josie certainly wouldn't be happy. So yeah, if you're worried, maybe do a little bit extra, and you can always reheat it and have it the next day. The other beauty that I should have mentioned earlier of this dish is you can definitely make it the day before Christmas, potentially even the day before that. So if you are off work on the 23rd, alongside the gravy, this would probably be something I'd be looking at making, because you can get it right to the point of needing to go in the oven in this dish, stick it in the fridge with some cling film, keep obviously the breadcrumb mixture you know, away. All you need to do is add that on the day into the oven for about an hour, and then hey presto, you're in the money. So we're going to take the broccoli off in a similar fashion to the cauliflower. It's obviously slightly easier. Now with the broccoli, definitely keep this. We're going to chop this up in a minute, and we're going to add this to the cheese sauce to give it that nice green texture. Little wastage as possible when it comes to the broccoli. Okay, put that to one side. Right, as you can hear in the background, the water is now boiling, so I've added some salt. We're going to add the cauliflower for about 2 minutes, test it with a knife. We want it to go gently soft, not too soft. It just needs to be partially cooked. Then we'll add the broccoli for 1.5 minutes, and then we'll drain. Next up, while the cauliflower blanches, we're going to get some bacon. This is smoked streaky bacon. You want bacon with lots of fat on for this bit. Obviously, if you're vegetarian or vegan, you don't need the bacon, but it does add a nice little bit of flavour and a bit of fat. So we're not going to use this whole pack. This is a nice organic, high welfare bacon. If the animal has had a happy life, I can guarantee you the meat will taste better, and it's better for everyone. So we're going to take these rashers and we're going to finely dice them, I guess. And then we're going to stick them in a nice pan with a bit of olive oil and a bit of butter. And that is going to form the base of our roux, which is going to form the base of the bechamel. I would say if you're going to use bacon, make sure it is smoked, because kind of the whole point of doing this is to add some real smoky, rich flavour to the bechamel sauce. If it isn't smoked, it's not the end of the world, but you are missing out on that smoky flavour. So it doesn't have to be too pretty. Now we've chopped the bacon, we're going to put a pan on the Aga, get it nice and hot. To be honest, with streaky bacon, you shouldn't need any oil in the pan because the fat will be enough. We're gonna get this bacon and cook it off on a medium heat. And while we do that, we're gonna grate the cheese. And while the bacon sizzles, we're gonna chop up this stalk of broccoli. And basically what you're looking to do with this is I like to cut it down in half, and then you're gonna cut it into like semi-circles. And you want it to be thin and small enough that it will cook in the bechamel and then break down. And then when you blitz up the cheese sauce, which we'll be doing, the cheese sauce will go nice and green, and you'll have all the goodness of the broccoli, but also a little bit of the flavour. And it's just very satisfying. A lot of love and care has gone into preparing and growing this broccoli. So it's from a local farm shop that we want to make sure we use as much of it as possible. Check on the bacon. Right, next up, we're gonna grate the cheese. As I said earlier, we've got 3 cheeses here. We've got a Parmesan, which we're gonna grate really finely with a Parmesan grater or the Parmesan setting on the grater, which is gonna be going primarily on the crumb top. The other 2 cheeses are gonna go in the bechamel sauce. So much like with the bacon with the smoked flavor, a smoked cheddar works really well. And we've just got a normal mature cheddar here. Definitely wanna look for a mature cheddar, something with a real deep flavor. And you do need a fair bit of cheese to make that sauce feel nice and cheesy. So we're gonna grate those. Now, we've got a good box grater here, which is pretty much a necessity for any kitchen. I think I got this one on Amazon, so it's pretty easy to find these. And on here, you've got the more coarse setting. We're gonna use that for the cheddars. With regards to the Parmesan, we're gonna use the much finer setting, which you might almost use for zesting. Now, this might look strange to you, but I've had a few accidents before, and particularly when filming, when grating. So this is a gauze glove, which just means that you can basically grate without having to worry about your fingers. Once again, a really worthwhile investment if you cook with a lot of ginger and garlic and you use that in a lot of sort of Asian style cooking. So, don't overthink it. We're just gonna do the cheddars together and then we'll keep the Parmesan separate. Nice long strokes, because you do want it to be sort of nice and fluffy, this cheese. You don't want it to be like all clumpy, because I just don't think it always cooks as well in the sauce. That could be nonsense, but that's just my gut feeling. The other beauty of a box grater is, of course, it collects it all in the middle here. And then what we're gonna do once we've grated both of them is we can just move it over a bowl and it's nice and tidy. Unlike the very professional YouTube channels, where I'm sure they really time everything, just as I'm grating this, I'm realizing I need to check on the cauliflower and broccoli. I added the broccoli, as I said, after the cauliflower, a few minutes after. That's been about 4 minutes and it is feeling the right sort of softness. As I say, don't overthink it, but you want it to just basically feel and look like it's partially cooked. So we're gonna take that off and drain it, and then we're gonna crack on with the rest of this, and then we'll start making the bechamel sauce. There's no rush. When you drain that, you can leave that there for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. Don't worry, it's partially cooked. It'll sit there fine as long as it's steaming away and it's dry. Don't leave it sat in the water, but you can drain it. Leave it there. There's no rush with this sort of cooking. And then we can crack on with the cheese sauce, and then we can put it all together, and that's when the magic really starts to happen. I do have one very serious rule. When you're grating cheese, you always need to leave a bit like this to taste. It's pretty much mandatory. That is amazing, actually. Smoked cheddar. Okay, we're gonna keep that separate, as I say, so we're gonna put that in a bowl, and then we're really gonna start making this bechamel sauce. Okay, so we have the broccoli and cauliflower steaming away there, and it's drained and ready to go when we need it. The bacon is almost there, and you want it to be just as cooked as possible, and get that fat really nicely cooked off. We've got the cheese grated, we've got the smoked cheese here, cheddar and a smoked cheddar in here together, so that's fine, that's together. I like to have everything in its right place. Then we've got the Parmesan here ready for when we make the breadcrumb mixture with some nice fresh rosemary from the garden. So all that's to do now is start bringing this all together. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get a garlic bulb, I'm gonna open it up like that. Always like to picture a politician when I do that. Then we're gonna just take 3 cloves of garlic, and we're gonna finely slice them, and we're gonna add those to the bacon, and then we're gonna add some butter, and that's gonna start forming the base of the roux. And for anyone that doesn't know, the roux is this first stage essentially of making a bechamel sauce. Essentially very, very straightforward. Butter, flour, and then you add the milk and then the cheese. But in this case, we've got the bacon and the garlic first before you have the butter and the flour. So open those up. Something starts to smell really nice when I often find when you start cooking with garlic and with onions, but particularly garlic, Josie will come downstairs and she'll be like, oh, something smells good. And all that's been cooking is garlic. Garlic just smells amazing. And I think, to be honest, it should be in as many dishes as possible. So we're going to finely slice that. There we go. We're going to add the garlic in with the bacon. And because it's been cooking in that bacon fat, you shouldn't really need any oil at this point. We're going to get that garlic started off, give it maybe a minute or two, and then we're going to add the butter. Things are really starting to come together now and smell really quite amazing. So next up, you're going to get your butter. Now, anyone that does a lot of cooking knows that butter is pretty key to pretty much anything amazing. But the provenance is also super important. So this is actually from a local dairy called 𝑭𝒆. I actually don't know exactly where it is. I get it from Quince and Clover. Let's have a look. Right, it's Oxfordshire. Oh, it's Bloxham, so it's actually super close by to here. So we're going to use a good amount of that. Once again, look, I'm not a great one for measurements. Just a good knob of butter for this. I'm going to cut off a nice corner, but this is salted butter as well. I've never really understood unsalted butter. I guess it's more for baking, but going to get that in there, mix that in with the garlic and the bacon, and things are going to start to smell amazing. While that's cooking away, the butter's just nicely melting into the pan and cooking with the garlic. We're going to take a few minutes. This is actually now a little bit cooler, the broccoli and the cauliflower. So we're going to line this up ready for the cheese sauce. As I said earlier, I mean, in this case, I think I can use my hands. We're just going to distribute it quite nicely and quite attractively so that we get a real even distribution of the broccoli and the cauliflower. Okay, so we've lined this all up ready. Now it's time to bring everything together with the bechamel sauce. So we've got the garlics cooked off a little bit with the bacon over here. So we're going to come over here, we're going to use a nice all-purpose flour. This is from a company called 𝑭𝒊𝒏𝒅, which, if you've watched Clarkson's Farm, you'll be familiar with this. These guys are pioneers in regenerative farming. If you don't know about them, have a look. It's fascinating, really interesting. I think it could be the future of farming in this country and maybe wider afield, no pun intended. So yeah, we're going to use, I think, around 4 tablespoons normally of this flour is what I would tend to use. We're going to put it in with the butter. We're going to make a roux. We're going to add some nice organic milk that we've got here. Organic whole milk, always use whole milk when you're doing this. And then we're going to add some mustard in, and then the sauce is going to come together. We're going to add all the cheeses in, we're going to mix it together in here, and we're going to get it in the oven. So without further ado, let's get the flour in with the butter. Add 4 heaped tablespoons of that. In we go. At this point, I always used to get quite nervous because it looks quite messy, which I'm not a huge fan of, but don't worry. When you add the milk, things are going to start to really come together. You want to introduce the milk slowly. You don't want to add all this in at once. I'll probably try and use most of this milk today, and I think this is about 1 litre. But anyway, going to add a small amount in to start with, and we're going to really stir this in. This is where things do tend to get a bit messier in the kitchen, but that's fine. And what you'll find is, as you stir that milk in, it will start to thicken. So we're going to add a bit more. Now, I think when people make a roux, certainly it becomes a little bit intimidating when you start adding the milk in, because it does, as I say, feel a little bit messy and it doesn't look great. But do not worry, things will smoothen up towards the end. The important thing here is just to be patient and build it up slowly. Now, you want to leave it alone for a little bit, which I always find quite hard in the kitchen. So I'm going to leave that alone for a second. I'm going to just let the flour cook into the milk, and that will slowly thicken. Keep an eye on it, but it should be fine. Don't let it burn, obviously, so we're on a low heat here. And then we're going to be adding in the cheese. Okay, so you'll see here, as I say, it's all about touch and feel. You'll see it's really started to thicken now. And what we're going to do is we're going to slowly introduce this cheese. You can take it off the heat, and we're going to add a good amount of this cheddar. Got the mixture of the smoked cheddar and the regular cheddar in here. I'm going to mix that in, and you'll find it's quite magical to watch it, to be honest, and it smells amazing. And we're going to add the rest in. I don't think you can have too much cheese in this, but as I say, the more cheese you add, the thicker it's going to get, so do beware of that. You can always add a bit more milk into this if it gets a little bit too thick. But you want a good amount of thickness. It will thicken a bit more as you cook the cauliflower and broccoli cheese, so just beware of that. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now, this is the bit which is totally a personal preference or not. We're going to add some strong English mustard in here. I'm going to add a little teaspoon. Of strong English mustard. You could add Dijon, it wouldn't probably, I'm gonna add a teaspoon and a half actually, because it's quite a good quantity here. But this is just gonna add a little bit of flavor and a bit of a kick to the sauce. So we're looking good now. At this point, I would say let's give it a little taste. Oh, that is lovely. That is really smoky. With the bacon and the smoked cheddar. What I would say is, if you're someone that doesn't like too much smokiness, don't maybe choose to leave one of those ingredients out, because that's smokier than I thought it would be, but really, really good. I think it's because that particular smoked cheddar I've not used before, and it's strong, but this is going to be a really nice flavour to go with that veg. So at this point, we're going to add in the broccoli that we chopped up earlier, the broccoli stalks. I'm going to put this back on the hob just for a couple of minutes to let that cook through, and then we're going to blend it. And we're going to create a nice, smooth, creamy sauce, and then we're going to get that hero shot before we get this in the oven. Okay, I promised I wouldn't do this in my cooking videos, but unfortunately it's unavoidable in this situation, in that we're going to be using the Thermomix. Now, you could use any food processor or any food blender for this stage to just make the sauce really creamy and blend it all together. Because we've had the broccoli, obviously there's a solid in there, and even the bacon, and this will make it a really smooth, creamy sauce. What I would say is, if you don't have a blender or a Thermomix, potentially maybe either leave the bacon and broccoli out, or you will just have a few bacony chunks within the sauce. But ultimately this is going to turn it into a really rich sauce, better than anything you can buy. And I think earlier on in the video I meant to talk about why we're doing this from scratch. Like with anything, like with the gravy, like even when we talked about the honey in the honey roast carrot video, it's so important we just make these things from scratch, because the alternatives that you buy in the shop, the cheese sauces in the shop, you do not even want to know what is in them. It's pretty terrifying. My rule of thumb is, if anything lasts for more than a week, unless it's in a can or a sealed jar, then you really need to question what ingredients is in that. And we have a cheese pasta sauce that someone bought us in the pantry that I believe lasts until like end of 2025. And I don't know what's in it, but it definitely cannot be good. So we're gonna get the sauce from here into here. We're gonna blend it up. We're gonna waz it up, as Jamie Oliver would say. And then we're gonna get the hero shot, and then in the oven, and hopefully time for a little coffee and put my feet up for a bit. Nailed it, mate. Right, there you go. It smells amazing. So, the one thing I was saying earlier actually to Jake, who's filming this, is I do feel like I need as many views as possible so I can get a glamorous assistant, because you don't even want to know how much washing up is currently building up over there, and I've got to do that after we film this. Anyway, right, so we're going to get this over here. For those not familiar, this is the Thermomix. It's something that we worked with Thermomix, or 𝑭𝒊𝒏𝒅, the brand that make them, way back about 8 or 9 years ago. Josie loves this. You can cook meals from scratch on this. It's very good for me personally as like a supportive tool in the kitchen. Very good for Yorkshire pudding batter. Very good for cheese sauces. Great for risottos. A huge investment, but you know, it is very worthwhile. And what's interesting is a lot of restaurants that we've been to in the last year or two, we've kind of started to notice that they all have them, and they're in a lot of professional kitchens. But we often joke, I mean, we don't work with them anymore. We'd love to work with Thermomix if they're watching, but I often joke, if you compare it to the La Marzocco, which is a beautiful Italian-made machine, I just wish they could make it look prettier, because to be honest, it's not the most attractive. It's a very functional machine. But we're just gonna get this on here. As I say, any other food processor or anything will probably work well. I'm gonna give it a minute, and I'm gonna put it on pretty fast. Dickens doesn't like this, but we're gonna have to do it. Okay, right. So let's line this up here. We are going to pour this all over the veg that we cooked earlier. Smells amazing. We might have too much here, but you can never have too much. You can keep it for later. And as I say, this will thicken a bit more as it cooks, so I would say this is a pretty perfect consistency. I'm going to try and get it into every nook and cranny. Don't overfill it, but you can't really have too much sauce. Okay, get that all in there. Right. As I say, I have made a bit too much, which is pretty standard in this household. So what we're going to do now, we're going to let that sit for a second. I'm going to store this and we're going to keep this sauce maybe to use for a pasta dish tomorrow. And then what we're going to do is we're going to, as Jamie Oliver would say, wazz up some breadcrumbs, some rosemary and some olive oil in here for the topping with the Parmesan, and then it's going to go in the arga. Okay, now we're ready to just elevate this cauliflower cheese. A lot of people would just grate cheese over that, which is fine. But what we're going to do is we're going to use some sourdough here, seeded sourdough that we've got, which actually isn't probably ideal. If you can, I would just use a regular sourdough, but we're just going to, it's a bit stale. We're going to cut the end off this. I'm going to cut a little bit of that. And we're going to basically cut it into chunks, and it's going to go into the Thermomix. Once again, any other food blender would do. If you haven't got a food blender, you could obviously try and finely dice this up, but I think that would be rather laborious. The other option, if you don't have a blender, is of course some flaked almonds. That would work really nicely. Dice up some flaked almonds, and that would, yeah, that would add that crunch, add that texture on top. And then with the Parmesan. Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna just take some rosemary off. This is our lovely homegrown rosemary. If you have any sort of garden space or any outdoor space, definitely get some rosemary in some pots. It looks beautiful, flowers in the summer, and smells amazing, and is super versatile. So we're then gonna finely dice that up. Into the Thermomix. Another beauty of the Thermomix, it's just all like that. Then all we're gonna do is a nice big glug of cold pressed extra virgin olive oil, organic. This one's Citizen of Soil. Good amount in there. Little bit of salt. And then we're gonna blitz this up. And then we're gonna add the Parmesan once we've blitzed it up. And then we're just gonna coat the top of the dish. You could obviously make this on the day so it stays nice and crispy, but definitely don't add it until the day that you're going to put this into the arga or the oven. So I would 100% do this on the day, or if you want to do it and put it in some Tupperware. So what we're then going to do is we're going to add the Parmesan into this. We are going to just give it a bit of a shake. And then, do you know what, before we do anything, I have not actually added any pepper to this sauce, which, to be fair, people might pick up on in the comments. Probably a bit of an error on my part. I'd add a bit of black pepper into this. So we're gonna add some pepper in at this point. For good measure, good amount of black pepper. Okay, now we're gonna add the breadcrumbs. Do you know what, I'm gonna use my hand just because then we can really make sure it gets into all the nooks and crannies of the dish. Adding the Parmesan as well adds a nice, different, strong cheese flavor. So, you know, I think Parmesan is pretty crucial for a cauliflower cheese. Some recipes often just use a cheddar, but when it comes to cheese sauce, Josie and I always live by the rule that it's got 2 cheeses and it's normally always Parmesan and a type of cheddar. This obviously has 3. Then, the last thing you're gonna do is just give it a nice drizzle of olive oil to just get it a bit crispy on top like that. And then it's going to go into the arga or oven at around 180 to 190 degrees Celsius. So the key here is not to overcook it, over blitz it too soon, because the cauliflower and broccoli still has to cook a little bit. The sauce needs to thicken, it all needs to marinate and cook together, and you want the top crispy. So my advice is always start lower, and then if you think it's cooked, if it's been half an hour, 40 minutes and it looks cooked, but the top isn't crispy, then you can put it in at a higher temperature. But as I say, at this point here, you're pretty much good to go. So I would probably line this up and then stick it in as your turkey or whatever piece of meat you're cooking on Christmas Day is resting. You can then stick it in the oven. So we're gonna go initially in this top arga, but lower down. Gonna have a little bit of a wash up. As I say, if there are any glamorous assistants out there looking for a job, there is a role here for you. It'll be paid in cauliflower cheese. It's been about 45 minutes and it's looking pretty good. So we're gonna get the cauliflower and broccoli cheese out. And obviously we're gonna plate it up just, you know, on its own today because I'm not doing a full roast. But the best thing about, I think, a cauliflower and broccoli cheese is to serve it in the pan that we prepared it in the center of the table and let everyone dig in. So let's get it out. Let's see what it looks like. Smells good. Oh, yeah, it's getting nice and crispy. And present that size less messy. But it's definitely come together nicely. And we're gonna plate up. And then maybe we'll dig in a little bit. Bit of everything. Thing is, I think because of the bacon and the broccoli and the cauliflower in this, you could definitely eat this on its own. It's not something I would necessarily cook to have on its own, but you definitely could. There we go. And there you have it, cauliflower and broccoli cheese with a nice rosemary and parmesan and breadcrumb crumb on top. I think personally one of our favourite and go-to dishes to go with any Sunday roast, but particularly a go-to for Christmas.